Welcome back to the Shir in Lekutei Sichos. This week we will be learning together the Sicha in volume 11, Parshas Tisa, the first Sicha which begins on page 139. Now this is a Rashi Sicha where the Rebbe analyzes a Rashi and he examines the most minute details of the Rashi, but extracts from that a very broad idea about Arna Kohen's involvement in the Egel, in the golden calf. I strongly suggest that before beginning to listen, you thoroughly read the Sukkim and the Rashi on the following. Chapter 32, Posuk 1, and the first Rashi on that Posuk for background, and we'll actually be learning the Rashi on Pasha 32, Posuk 4, the beginning of the Posuk. For those who do not have access to the Chumash and Rashi in front of them, I will be going through the details of the Sukkim and the Rashi inside. Before we begin, we need to learn several rules. Some of them are rules in Rashi which the Rebbe develops, and one of them is the halachic rule, which the Rebbe uses in order to analyze some of the details of this story. The rules in Rashi are as follows. Often, Rashi will bring more than one explanation of a word or a phrase. This means that there is a difficulty in each of these explanations, and that difficulty is satisfied by the other explanation. However, the one that is first, the explanation that is first in Rashi, is more well applied, more comfortable in the explaining of the Pshuta Shel Mikra, the simple meaning of the Posuk, than the second one. Sometimes Rashi feels that the two interpretations are of equal weight. However, it's impossible to record them both simultaneously, and therefore Rashi will preface before both of them. Some say this way, some say that way. Or, it is possible to understand this posuk in several ways. Once we have that introduction, we know that the reason Rashi put the first one first is not because it is preferable to the second one, but because one of them has to be first. And so it is with the Rashi which we will be studying. Second rule. Rashi will often explain a certain posuk in line with one of the explanations that he gave for a different posuk. It is even possible that Rashi will explain one posuk in line with one of the interpretations that he gave elsewhere in another posuk according to another interpretation that he gave in a different posuk. Third rule. Rashi is out for Pshuta Shel Mikra, for the simple understanding of the verse. However, in his choice of language and in the order of his words, you will find couched in Rashi allusions either to the halachic aspects of Torah or to the mystical aspects of Torah, so that the Shaloh HaKodesh, the Holy Shaloh, refers to Rashi as Yeino Shel Torah, the wine of Torah. But these things are not explicit in Rashi, only as said, alluded to by his order of words or choice of words, and sometimes the reason Rashi's wording seems strange is because he's alluding to some point which is not according to Pshute Shel Mikra, or not an obvious point that he wants to bring out, only for the more well-schooled student, the more astute student, to pick up an answer to a question that astute student might have. So he only alludes to it. Lastly, a halachic rule which reads, Ein odom oister dovor she'enoi sheloi. A person cannot make forbidden an object which is not his. Meaning, it's obviously true that if I put some treifa meat into your soup, although the soup is not mine, it will nevertheless become treif, because after all, it's a fact that there is treifa meat in the soup flavoring the soup. So the soup becomes treif regardless of ownership. However, this rule that a person cannot forbid an object which doesn't belong to him, that applies in those kinds of isurim, prohibitions, where a necessary component of the prohibition is the person's intention or thought. For example, and this will be relevant in our case, in Avodah Zorah, where a person's thoughts are paramount, because if a person does an action but doesn't have in mind any thought of idolatry, then the action per se, such as prostrating oneself before the idol, or so forth, anything which would consist of idolatrous service, is not considered as serving idolatry unless one actually had in mind to do so. So it's primarily the thought and the intention that the prohibition of Avodah Zorah and the resulting prohibition to be nehene, to make use of the object which was used in serving idolatry. So it's primarily the thought and the intention that creates the sin and the resulting prohibition of the object. So there the rule applies that if A did something to B's item, for example, the Gemara gives, if A bows down to an animal belonging to B and accepts it as some kind of a deity, then that item, that cow belonging to B, does not become avodah zorah, does not become prohibited as an avodah zorah, an idolatrous object, because A doesn't have the power over B's possessions to make them osur or to otherwise consecrate them. Now, each of these rules will be relevant at various points along this sikha. Now, the Rebbe begins by quoting the Rashi on the Pasuk, in 34, 4, where the Torah says that the people got anxious when Moshe Rabbeinu did not return from the mountain. He was due to come on a certain day, and they thought that the day had arrived and he hadn't come. They miscalculated, and therefore they were agitated, and they said to Aaron, let us make for us a guide, because Moshe Rabbeinu, who led us out of Mitzrayim, we don't know what happened to him. So Aaron HaKohen is stalling because he knows that Moshe Rabbeinu will come back when he said he will come back. So he stalls and he says to them, get me the gold in the jewelry of your wives and your children and bring it to me. So the men quickly brought the jewelry, the gold that was in the jewelry. They brought it to Aaron, and here we come to our postuk, Vayikach miyodom vayotzer oisoi bacheret. Aaron took it from their hand, vayotzar, which is an unusual word that needs to be interpreted. Either he bound it or he formed it. Bacheret means either if he bound it in some kind of a cloth, say a scarf, or if it means he formed it with a stylus, with an engraving tool. Now, because those words are unusual, especially Bacheret, has no parallel in Chumash. So Rashi comments, Bacheret can be interpreted two ways. One, either Vayotzar means he bound it up, he bundled up the gold, and Bacheret means a kerchief or a scarf, as it says in Melochim, Vahamitpoches Vahacharitin, the kerchiefs and the scarves, and also another postuk similarly. And the second possible interpretation is Vayotzar in the sense of form, Tzuro. So Vayotzar would mean he formed it. He formed the gold, and Bacheret with a stylus, which is a tool used by craftsmen who form different designs in gold, like an ordinary person would use the stylus to write on wax tablets or on clay, as it says in Yeshaya that Hashem told Yeshaya Hanovi in a vision to take a big paper and ukstoivolov becheret enoish, write on it becheret with a scratching tool or a stylus, enoish of a weak man, meaning with such big writing that even somebody with poor eyesight or somebody who doesn't easily read will be able to read this writing. So again, the word cheret is used as a writing tool, and Rashi continues explaining based on the Targum. The Rebbe goes into detail about the Targum and Rashi's exact words in citing the Targum and explaining the Targum, but we will have to leave those details. The Rebbe asks on this Rashi, why is it that Rashi has to bring two interpretations at all? Normally when Rashi brings two interpretations, is because of one of them is unsatisfactory. It leaves something to be desired. But over here, each of them stands alone. It fits well in the meaning of the pasuk. Why does Rashi also have to introduce the interpretation by saying we can interpret it in two ways? Why not just go into the two interpretations and we'll count 1, 2. And Rashi's choice of language here, Ho'echod, the one interpretation is such and such, and Hasheni, the second one is such and such. This is an unusual choice of words for Rashi. Generally, when you have an ordinal number first and second, you say Rishon, the first, and Sheni, the second. Not Echod, the one, and Hasheni, the second. As in fact, Rashi comments in the account of creation, where it says it was evening and morning one day instead of the first day. So Rashi brings from Chazal, why is it that it says Echod instead of Rishon, one instead of first? And he explains it there. But over here too, when Rashi uses the term Echod instead of Rishon, there must be a reason. The Rabbi then goes into the proofs, the proof text which Rashi cites in support of each of these interpretations. The Rabbi asks about the order of these proof texts and why Rashi doesn't bring from earlier psukim in Chumash Bereshis, where we have similar words, Vayotzar, Vayitzroir, Thrurois, and why Rashi seems generally to be very wordy. The Rabbi explains that the word Vayotzar cannot be understood in the same way as we had earlier in Chumash Bereshis, Thrurois, because over there's a double reish, Thrurois, Throir Kaspoy, the bundle of his silver. So it's Throir with a double reish. Over here it's Vayotzar with one reish. So clearly it's a different root. Therefore Rashi explains that in fact it means the same as Throir, but it's a different form. So where do we find that? Therefore Rashi brings proof texts from Melochim and from Yeshaya, where Vayotzar also means he bundled or he tied. Once we interpret Vayotzar as he tied, then Bacheret, what he tied it in, is the thing which people normally use to tie up, to bundle up their possessions, especially their gold or silver or jewelry, and that is the kerchief or a cloth, a scarf, and that's Bacheret. And the Rebbe then proceeds to analyze the word Bacheret as opposed to Charitin, which is brought in the psukim which Rashi cites, and the Rebbe explains that Cheret is in fact an unusual form where the plural takes a different form from the singular. Now, here we come to the crux of the matter. The problem with the first interpretation of Rashi that Vayotzar means he bundled, and Bacheret is the kerchief, is that according to this interpretation, what happens is that Arna Kohen receives the gold from the people who gave him the jewelry, the golden jewelry. He simply bundled it into a cloth, and he did not actually form it into a golden calf. In order to understand better what happened, there's a Rashi further on which follows this first interpretation, where Rashi explains that Aaron threw the gold into the fire, but then it was the intervention either of the sorcerers among the Erev Rav, the mixed multitude who brought along their dark arts from Mitzrayim, either they intervened and turned that molten gold into a golden calf, or it was a certain individual who, by misusing Hashem's name, turned the gold into a golden calf. But at any rate, all Aaron did was to bundle up the gold, throw it into the fire, and thereby it melted, but in no way was Aaron accountable for the fact that it turned into a golden calf. As a matter of fact, when Aaron recounts to Moshe Rabbeinu, when Moshe Rabbeinu comes down from the mountain the next day, and he says to Aaron, what happened? So Aaron says, I took the gold, I threw it into the flame, and out came this golden calf. So Aaron seemed very surprised about the fact that it emerged as a golden calf. So he surely was not involved in forming it into a golden calf. Now the pasuk says, Aaron took the gold from the people's hands. He bundled it, according to this interpretation, into a kerchief. Vaya'asteu, and he made it into an egel mastecho, a molten calf. Who made it into a golden calf? According to this interpretation in Rashi, the subject switches. The first half is talking about Aaron. He took it from their hands, the gold from their hands. He bound it up in a kerchief. And who made it into a golden calf from that gold in the kerchief? It was others, either the sorcerers or that individual Micho. But at any rate, it wasn't Aaron. So we have here a switch in subject from one part of the pasuk to the other part of the pasuk without naming anybody. The pasuk switches subjects from Aaron to some other unnamed individual. That's difficult. That's a difficult way to explain the pasuk. Because of this difficulty, Rashi brings a second interpretation, and according to that interpretation, it was in fact Aaron who formed it into a calf. He, vayotzar, according to this second interpretation, means he formed it. Bacheres, by means of an engraving tool, he formed it into a calf. So the subject of this sentence in both parts of the pasuk agrees. He, Aaron, took the gold from their hand, and he, Aaron, formed it into a calf. So that's much smoother. But the problem with that interpretation is that later on, as I said, when Aaron HaKohen tells the story to Moshe Rabbeinu, he said that he was surprised that it emerged as a golden calf. So how can we say that Aaron HaKohen himself fashioned it into a golden calf? Why would he be surprised later? Because of this difficulty, Rashi resorts to the first interpretation, which is that in fact Aaron was surprised because he didn't fashion it. He simply bundled the gold and threw it into the flame, and it emerged as a golden calf. Now, it turns out, according to this, that both interpretations of the pasuk are of equal weight. On the one hand, they both fit well with the simple meaning of these words, Vayotzar oisoi bacheret. On the other hand, the subsequent pasuk, either the subsequent part of the same pasuk, where the subject changes according to the first interpretation, he made it into a golden calf. Who is that he? According to the first interpretation, it is someone else, so the subject changes. That's the difficulty with the first interpretation, not in the words Vayotzar Oisei Bacheret themselves, but in the subsequent part of the Pasuk, or the subsequent part of the subsequent Pasuk later on, where Aaron HaKohen tells the story, and that he was surprised when it emerged as the golden calf, which obviously means that he didn't form it into a calf. So either way, in the word Vayotzar Oisei Bacheret, both interpretations fit well. Both interpretations have a difficulty from subsequent psukim. So it comes out that both of them are of equal weight. And that's why Rashi says as an introduction, Yesh letargemoi, we are able to interpret this postuk mishnei ponim in two ways, so that you understand that both interpretations are equal, except they cannot be written simultaneously. So I'm writing the one first before the other, but not because it has any preference over the other. And now the Rebbe goes into a totally different area based on these interpretations. According to their first interpretation, it comes out that Aaron acted completely innocently of fashioning the golden calf. He simply stole for time. He got them to give their jewelry, which he presumed would take time, and he's doing everything to stall until Moshe Rabbeinu comes back. He had nothing to do with fashioning the golden calf. But according to this second Pirush, the second interpretation, it comes out that Aaron HaKohen actually formed the egel, the golden calf. And that's a very, very strange thing to say about Aaron HaKohen, whose holiness and greatness we've had this described earlier and even more later in Chumash. Aaron HaKohen is involved in Avodah Zorah. It's unthinkable. Says the Rebbe, isn't it likewise unthinkable that Bnei Yisrael, the nation, would want to fashion an Avodah Zorah and serve it? So the question is not just on Aaron HaKohen, but on the nation as a whole. However, says the Rebbe, the truth is that the nation did not want an actual deity, a god, to serve. That wasn't what the egel was originally meant to serve. Let's consider what happened. Moshe Rabbeinu does not return, according to the people's miscalculation, Moshe Rabbeinu does not return when he was meant to. So they're left leaderless. So what do the people want? A guide, someone to lead them, because the one who guided them out of Egypt is gone. So when they said, Kum asei lonu elihim asher yelchu lefoneinu, arise and make for us an Elohim which will go before us, this usage of the term doesn't mean a god, but as we find earlier, that Aaron himself was told that you will be the spokesman, and Moshe Rabbeinu will be your Elohim, your authority. So the word Elohim doesn't mean only a god, it means anybody in authority. For example, judges are called Elohim, and others, sar, a ruler, anyone in power is called Elohim. So when the people said, Kum asei lonu Elohim, they wanted simply a guide, a leader, to lead them. What happened later, once the egel had been fashioned, then the Erev Rav induced or incited some of the people to actually serve it as a god, and those were the people who were killed when Moshe Rabbeinu came down from the mountain. He had several thousand of the people killed. Those were the minority of Bnei Yisrael who actually served Avodah Zorah, but the original intention was simply to appoint a leader and a guide. How did the people make that mistake? Because they understood that it's possible that there would be an intermediary in between God and them, perhaps like Moshe Rabbeinu, or perhaps like the subsequent cherubim, the cherubs on top of the Orna Kodesh, on top of the Holy Ark in the Mishkan, which they imagined served as an intermediary between Hashem and between them, and so too this authority, this leader, which they were looking for, would be the intermediary between Hashem and between them. The truth is that Hashem had told Moshe right after the revelation at Sinai to tell the people, do not make for me, with me, Elehei Kesef, Elehei Dov, forms of gold and silver, so that they would serve as any kind of intermediary. Hashem had forestalled that possibility. However, Moshe Rabbeinu had never gotten a chance yet to come down to the people and convey that instruction, because he was still at the top of the mountain for 40 days. So he hadn't yet transmitted that instruction not to make any intermediaries. Therefore, the people imagined that they could make an intermediary, and that he would be instead of Moshe. So that was their intention in making the Egel originally. So it's not so much a matter of Avodah Zorah, a foreign god, but a leader and a guide. That explains the people's mistake. What about Aaron? But before we go into what Aaron did, let's first understand how the Rebbe shows an allusion to this idea of an intermediary when he brings the postuk from Yeshaya in order to explain Bacheret. He cites the postuk from Yeshaya where Hashem says to Yeshaya in the vision, write on this gilyon, on this sheet, Becheret Enoish, with a stylus or with a pen, Enoish, so that anyone could, a simple person could read it. Now that word Enoish is an allusion to the origin of idolatry. The Rambam explains in his first chapter of the laws of Avodah Zorah, how did Avodah Zorah ever come into being? How did people take it into their heads that a piece of wood or stone would be a god? So the Rambam explains that actually the origin of Avodah Zorah was not in idolatry at all. The origin was like this. Adam Horishoin, Adam had a grandson. A direct grandson, the son of his son Sheth. That grandson's name was Enosh. And he and the people of his generation made a basic theological mistake. The mistake was that since Hashem runs the world by means of different celestial beings, the sun, the moon, the stars, they all have an effect on the running of the world. So they are Hashem's agents, and therefore one ought to accord honor to them, being that they are Hashem's agents in his running the world. Why was that a mistake? Because you can accord honor to someone if he does something of his own volition. However, these heavenly bodies which act on the earth, they don't do so because they decided to do so. They are, as the Chazal, as the Postuk uses the term, They are like an axe in the hand of the woodcutter. Will anybody praise the axe? Will the axe itself be proud of its accomplishment? Surely it's just a tool in the hand of the woodcutter. So too are these bodies, which act as Hashem's agents, but they are not acting of their own volition, and therefore it is a mistake to consider them intermediaries and to give them honor. Now that mistake further deteriorated into separating these heavenly bodies into separate, independent actors who do things on their own, and subsequently the people began to worship them. They subsequently began to worship representations of these heavenly bodies in the forms of statues or trees. Now, the people eventually totally forgot about the original idea of giving honor to those whom Hashem, so to speak, appointed in order to influence the world. Now they're simply serving the idols, the sticks and the stones, the images, and they forgot about the original idea. But what was the original idea? Intermediaries. Who was the one who came up with it, or who was prominent in that idea? That was Enosh, grandson of Odom Horishon. Rashi, by citing the pasuk from Yeshaya, where the word Enosh is mentioned, right on it, Becheret Enosh, with a pen, so that even an Enosh, a simple person, can read it. By using that word Enosh, Rashi is alluding to the Enosh who was the origin of the original idea before Avodah Zorah came into being. So Rashi is saying with this allusion that in fact that's what the people wanted, an intermediary, not a god. So that's why the people, what they wanted was an intermediary. They weren't involved in actual Avodah Zorah. And when Aaron acceded to their wish, he wasn't giving them an Avodah Zorah. He was giving them what they wanted, which is an intermediary to guide them. That explains in a simple way why Arna Cohen was not guilty of idolatry, and why the people in general were not out to form an idol, which would be very surprising. Now the Rabbi proceeds to explain in a way of halacha how it is that Arna Cohen was not guilty of the sin of idolatry. Now let's go back. Arna Cohen tells the people, "Bring me the gold and the jewelry on your wives and children. Bring it to me." Arna Cohen doesn't actually acquire that gold. It's not that they gave it to him. They brought it to him, but Aaron doesn't actually own it. He doesn't want to own it. He wants nothing to do with that gold. And the people, in fact, had said to him at first, "Astei lonu Elohim, make for us an Elohim, a God, a guide, whatever, but make it for us." So they don't intend it to be Aaron's. They say it's for us. So it comes out that this gold remained the possession of Bnei Yisrael. Being that the rule is that a person cannot make forbidden an object which doesn't belong to him, and if a person served that which belongs to another as idolatry, that object doesn't in fact become an idol and therefore forbidden. So it works out that Aaron, in terms of halacha, could not be guilty of idolatry with the gold that belonged to Bnei Yisrael, because it would be like one person forbidding the object of another. The Rebbe then goes into the finer points of whether a person can forbid another person's object by means of an action. We will have to leave those halachic details, which the Rebbe goes into very thoroughly in his analysis in this Ticha. Finally, the Rebbe turns to another point, and that is the Yena Shel Torah, the wine of Torah, which is contained in the choice of wording of Rashi. We'll have to keep this very short, but at least the kernel of the idea. How is it that anyone could come to a thought that there's anything but one God? Everything has a root, a source. The idea that there could be anything but Hashem Echad has to have a source. The source for everything is in Torah. How could Torah contain the germ of the idea that there's anything but one God, there's a multiplicity? So the source for that is in the fact that in Torah itself there is multiplicity. In other words, the fact that Torah, which is Torah Achas, one indivisible Torah, is nevertheless interpretable in various ways and is interpreted in various ways by various Chachomim, it lends itself to various interpretations. That's the beginning of multiplicity in the place of unity. And that allowed, through various devolutions and downward progressions, for people to come to ultimately to the idea that there's a multiplicity of gods. As we also find in the Chumash, in the account of creation, where Hashem said, "Let us make man." Chazal tell us that Moshe Rabbeinu said to Hashem, "Are you going to write, 'Let us make man'? Are you going to allow room for the meaning, for the heretics to latch on to this?" So Hashem said, "You write as I told you, Nas Odom, let us make man." He who wants to make a mistake will make a mistake. This itself will not lead him into a mistake. But if a person wants to make a mistake and think that there's many gods, let him make a mistake and latch on to this. I will allow for that possibility. Similarly, more generally, the fact that there's multiplicity in Torah allows for the possibility of ultimate mistake of Avodah Zorah. Now, this is the allusion in Rashi that begins with the words, "This posuk can be interpreted in two ways." The word Bacheret and Vayotzar can be interpreted in two ways. By that introduction, Rashi is actually suggesting that this is the beginning of the possibility of an egel. The fact that Vayotzar Oisai Bacheret, like many other areas in Torah, is interpretable in two ways. That means that there's a possibility for a plurality, even in Torah Achas, in the one unified and indivisible Torah, that allows for the possibility in the world of people mistaking Hashem Echad for a multitude of gods. A multitude of gods for the Hashem Echad. So, This introduction alludes to that possibility, and hereby Rashi is giving us the concealed meaning of Vayotzaroise Bacheret, that this is how the idea of Avodah Zorah, of an egel, begins. What prevents a person from coming to such a mistake? It is his faith, his absolute, unshakable faith in Hashem's unity, and his Kabbalah soil, his self-discipline, his acceptance of Hashem's words, that the way Hashem says it, that's the way it is, and he's not even going to entertain any other possibilities. So when Hashem says Hashem Echad, or I am Hashem your God, that's it. So the stronger one's faith is, the less prone he is to make the mistake, which is possible even based on Torah. But he won't make that mistake if he is subject to that emunah and that Kabbalah soil. And that's why when it says that Arna Kohen took the gold from the people, it uses the expression Vayisporoku. They were unloaded. That's the same expression as prikas oil, the opposite of Kabbalah oil. Kabbalah oil means accepting upon oneself the yoke of the discipline of Hashem's word. Prikas oil means unbundling oneself, shaking off from oneself the discipline of Hashem's word. And that Vayisporoku is the source of a person's mistake, which ultimately leads to Avodah Zorah, which is the reason why we find that the women whose emunah was stronger, as we see, they didn't make the mistake of following the spies who disparaged Eretz Yisrael. Their faith was strong. They didn't worship the Egel, because faith and the discipline of listening to Hashem's word prevent a person from being mistaken and believing in Avodah Zorah. So the women had the stronger emunah, so they weren't led into that mistake. So therefore, when a person has that emunah, even where there's a possibility of the mistake, he doesn't make it, and that's why Rashi begins with that posuk, that interpretation on Vayisporoku. They were relieved of their gold, and he continues that the posuk is interpretable in two ways, which is the origin of the possibility of Avodah Zorah, which a person avoids by his emunah and his Kabbalah oil.